What's it like to trade crypto on Kraken? Let's say I'm in a state-of-the-art gym surrounded by powerful-looking machines. Do I head straight for the squat rack? I could, but this gym has options like trainers, fitness pros, spotters to back me up. That's crypto on Kraken. Powerful crypto tools backed by 24/7 support and multi-layered security. Go to Kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Interactive Inc., PWI, DBA Kraken. View PWI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
This is the way.
We wanted men.
Welcome to another edition of Smuggler's Galaxy, brought to you by the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors. It's a Star Wars collecting podcast for mouth breathers everywhere. I'm co-host John Waterhouse, and joining me today, as always, please welcome co-host Justin Haney.
How are we doing today, guys?
Great to have you, Justin. And also Glenn Williams, another co-host on the program. What is shaking, Glenn?
Yeah, just another day in paradise, man.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons we're living in a Star Wars paradise happens to do with a certain film that is celebrating its 40th anniversary. I'm talking about The Empire Strikes Back. An extremely pivotal moment in Star Wars history happened when that film was released, and it certainly had an incredible impact on us collectors. One such collector is Narayan Naik of Atlanta. He's a member of the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors and owner of a massive, impressive Star Wars collection that he dubs Mos Atlanta Cantina. Narayan has a variety of items in his collection, but he puts great focus on three Kenner action figures, in particular, Boba Fett, Yoda, and Jedi Luke. Now, the first two obviously debuted on the big screen in The Empire Strikes Back. So we're going to talk about those two characters and Narayan's collection on Smuggler's Galaxy. Welcome, Narayan.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Thanks for the invitation.
It's great to have you on the show, Narayan, and we're extremely excited to talk about your collection. I got to say, the first time that I saw it, my jaw literally fell on the floor. It's absolutely incredible. And here we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back.
Luke Skywalker and Han Solo rescued the princess, destroyed the Death Star, but their story didn't end there. Creators of the biggest smash hit of all time bring you the next episode in the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back.
So I would like each of you guys, if we could take a moment and talk about the impact of that film and really what sort of impact it had on us as Star Wars collectors.
Yeah, absolutely. The Empire Strikes Back is arguably the best of all the films. It's my personal favorite for sure. Being a Han and Leia focused collector, some extremely memorable scenes happen in that film. That I Love You, I Know is 100% iconic, striking moment. That film really, it introduces, some great creatures and characters that have withstood the test of time. And as a collector, it really just brought some great stuff forward, right? It expanded this world and this galaxy, and just huge impact.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, like Justin was saying, I was rewatching the I Love You, I Know scene this morning, the carbonite chamber scene, because my grandson I have a Han and carbonite on the wall, and he's like, why is he frozen? Why is he, upset? And it almost brings you to tears, because you just, the impact of it is incredible.
And Narayan, let's talk about your feelings for that film and what sort of impact it had on you as a Star Wars collector.
I've always had a fondness for that film because it was the first film I think I saw with my family in the movie theater back in 1980, back in Pittsburgh, near a shopping mall, I believe, North Hills Village. There was actually a children's palace. And there was, I do remember a theater there that we first went to see Empire Strikes Back. And I believe I even saw that even before I saw Star Wars. I think we may have seen that on cable or HBO, whatever it was on back then, shortly afterwards. But even without having seen the first movie, just an incredible movie to watch. I certainly knew something about Star Wars going into the movie. Just blown away seeing it on a big screen, and just the visuals, the incredible dialogue, and how well developed the characters were in that movie. You just leave a great lasting impression. Just such memorable characters introduced in there as well.
Absolutely. And I think this film really hits all the points. I mean, it's got action a go-go, right out of the gate. It's got great emotion. As you said, Narayan, fantastic character development. And I got to say, Empire Strikes Back is a really, really funny film in a lot of ways. Great lines, but also extremely emotional. Like I said, it really hits all the points and it really grabs you. And I think that's the reason that it's really withstood the test of time and hits the number one spot on many Star Wars fans' list as the ultimate best Star Wars film.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, it really does. It hits all the notes. It's a roller coaster. It's definitely the darkest of the original trilogy. It just an amazing second step, right, in that franchise. It's rare you see something outdone, in a sequel, and I think they hit it with Empire for sure.
Certainly. As you said earlier, Justin, the characters. So many great characters were introduced in this film, and two of those characters are part of Narayan's focus collection, as I mentioned earlier, Boba Fett and Yoda. And let's start with Boba Fett and the appeal of this character. I have to say, I was introduced to Boba Fett sitting on my bunk bed, watching on my small bedroom TV as an 8-year-old kid, the Star Wars Holiday Special, and seeing the animated Boba Fett and being absolutely enthralled with this character out of the gate. And when we see Boba in Empire Strikes Back, which was the second time I got a taste of him, there's so much mystique there. You get that tease of this character who has a backstory that you can only imagine. And I think that's part of the magic of Boba Fett, and the appeal of Boba Fett is the fact that you see this incredibly cool, badass character, and you can only imagine what adventures he's seen in the galaxy. And he's that man with no name, and really just an amazing character. And I think that's one of the reasons Boba Fett hooked me from the beginning. Can you guys talk about that, the appeal of Boba Fett?
Yeah, I mean, Boba Fett, he was just a striking guy on the screen. I mean, you see that T-visor, and he doesn't talk a whole lot, but that T-visor, you just, it's amazing. And then his armor, and it's a cool character. I remember having him as a kid, and he was my favorite character. You play with him so much, the chest rubs off, the chest piece paint rubs off on it. But just there was no other character like that in the Star Wars galaxy. When he came out, everything about him, he was just such, like you said, he was such a badass, and he needs Darth Vader to kind of help him out, but he captures Han Solo, and just everything about him, it was amazing. Narayan, what's your feelings on him?
Well, what can you say? I mean, as soon as he appears on the screen, makes such an impression with that armor, and the fact that he doesn't talk a lot, I think the audience almost projects this aura of mystique and mystery about him. And he's also as so many of the Imperials there, the coloration is just sort of black and white, and he's got this very colorful armor, and you don't know whether he's kind of completely a bad guy or a good guy. He has his own agenda. And so it's something that's like a more nuanced character than was introduced before. So you don't just have the good guys and the bad guys. You have these kind of bounty hunters that are in there, and they have their own agenda in this movie.
Exactly right, Narayan. There's definitely a mystique about him, a man of few words. So you kind of make up this own story in your mind, right? You don't know what his true agenda is, where his allegiances really lie. It's a bounty. Go to the highest bidder. And I think there's just a really cool mystique there that people gravitated towards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's a true testament to character design and storytelling, the fact that there's really minimal action featuring Boba Fett in the film. You know, I mean, not to mention little dialogue, but he doesn't do a whole lot, yet we're immediately drawn and captivated by this character. And that says a lot, you know, for many reasons. I mean, going back to, like I said, Joe Johnston's design of the character is just impeccable. Wow, Boba Fett, absolutely an amazing character in the Star Wars universe. And Justin, as you were talking about the mystique of the character and just not knowing much about him, I almost wish we didn't ever get Boba's backstory, because I think that was really part of the appeal, is just not knowing and him being even more mysterious because of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
From Kenner's Star Wars collection comes the Stormtrooper, the Sand People, and all 20 action figures, including new Hammerhead, Snaggletooth, and more, each sold separately. And now, Boba Fett, Star Wars villain with his laser rifle. Boba Fett is not yet available in stores, but you can get him free with 4 proofs of purchase from any Star Wars action figures. Details on specially marked packs at participating stores. Offer ends May 31st. Star Wars action figures sold separately from Kenner.
And then, of course, we have Yoda, another focus in Narayan's collection. Yoda, wow. We could speak volumes about this character. And I think, first of all, the fact that Yoda is basically a Muppet, right? But that suspension of disbelief because of this character design as well is absolutely takes away that fact. I mean, Yoda is a living, breathing actor in this film. And I think that's, you know, a cinematic achievement, a puppetry achievement that just really goes beyond explanation. Can you guys kind of weigh in on the appeal of Yoda?
I'll be happy to jump in. Yoda, I mean, he's the spiritual center of Star Wars. And this movie epitomizes kind of the whole philosophy behind the films and George's kind of vision of the films. And the fact that a puppet, you know, not even a living, breathing actor, I mean, that's actually in the movie, can sell that in this movie is incredible. And that it just speaks to the testament of just the designers. And, you know, obviously Frank Oz brought that character to life, as well as his other animators that worked with him. But just an incredible thing to behold. And he steals every scene that he's in. And the dialogue is just immensely powerful.
Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And where you should not. For my ally is the Force. And a powerful ally it is.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Yoda's scenes, I mean, he full range of emotion, right? He's funny. He's dark and mysterious, and he gets serious at times when needed. And like you said, Narayan, in the hero's journey, you know, I mean, he's the teacher, and he really does exemplify everything that the Force means, right? It's a 3-dimensional thing that represents everything about the Force, this one character, and absolutely amazing to see it brought to life in that film.
The more you watch of Yoda, the more you watch of like the Clone Wars and Rebels, and it adds more mystique to the character. He's a cooler character. The more you get into it. But yeah, it just his dialogue, like you said, his dialogue is like, what the heck is this dude saying? Why is he talking so weird? Why is he obsessed with a freaking flashlight? Which, you know, always kind of blew my mind that, you know, this great warrior acted like, what the heck is this flashlight? But, you know, even that scene with him and R2 fighting over it. And yeah, didn't you see this little guy when he pulls the X-Wing out of the swamp? You know, Luke couldn't do it, but this little 2-foot tall alien could lift this, you know, huge X-Wing from the swamp. Definitely a cool character.
What an introduction that was. The fact that he came out almost funny and it's almost a misdirection for the audience. And then all of a sudden you learn that he's the Jedi Master that Luke's been looking for. And it's just an incredible thing to behold.
A great setup for sure. So, Narayan, let's talk about the reasoning behind your focus of Boba Fett and Yoda as part of your collection, those original Kenner figures. What led you to focus on these two characters?
Well, I think pretty obviously, since I saw Empire first in the theaters, that was around the same time that I was probably also shopping for toys. I mean, who wouldn't want to go and get Yoda and Boba Fett as soon as they saw that movie? Because I mean, those were the two characters that made the most impression, at least the new characters that made the most impression out of that movie. And I knew as soon as Yoda came out on the shelves that I had to have him. And I think one of the few, I had plenty of action figures as a child, but very few playset. The only ones that I remember are the Dagobah playset. I think I had one Hoth playset. And then I had the X-Wing, which was actually the battle-damaged Dagobah X-Wing. It made a great impression. And I played with that playset all the time. Every time it rained, I would go out and put that playset out near a tree. I mean, just like the movie, it was just incredible to have that set. And it had a lot of details, too, that really brought out that scene.
What a creepy swamp!
It's Kenner's new Dagobah action playset. You have to put it together. Action figures each sold separately.
Yoda, I'm stuck! Fear not, Luke Skywalker. I'll save you. Now I'll teach you the ways of the Jedi with the lightsaber. Now how to levitate. I'm trying, Yoda. I did!
New Dagobah action playset from Kenner Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back collection. Action figures each sold separately.
Speaking of that Dagobah playset, Narayan, you might know a little better. Aren't there some hidden features in that playset that a lot of people aren't aware of that the original sculptor sculpted into some of the tree roots and things like that?
Yeah, if you really look in closely to the playset, there are all sorts of creatures and animals and things sculpted into the playset, which at first glance are not obvious because of the paint scheme. Essentially, you just have two colors: the dark brown of the tree roots, and the ground is kind of a light tan, and then the foam. But if you really look at that, there's so many different animals and things sculpted into the ground as well as the tree trunk. I mean, it's a neat little Easter egg, but it's not immediately obvious when you look at that set.
Kind of what I was referring to. You might not even know this. The original sculptor sculpted his daughter's name into that set. Her name was Emily.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So just kind of a unique piece of history there. It got past Kenner, and it's not easily visible, and maybe it's just kind of a rumor. It can definitely be seen. And I can't recall exactly where it's at, but you can probably hunt for it.
Yeah, we'll have to find that and post a picture here.
So, Narayan, let's talk about the first steps into a larger world of collecting that you took as far as becoming a Boba Fett and Yoda action figure focused collector. And we're talking about the original run of those figures by Kenner. How did you dive into this, and what was that experience like out of the gate?
In just my loose run, or just collecting those two specific characters?
Collecting those two specific characters. And I want to add by saying to the listeners, when you walk into Mos Atlanta Cantina, which is Narayan's collection, his display at his home, there are literally walls of Yoda figures on the card, original Yoda figures on the card, and Boba Fett, not to mention Jedi Luke. I mean, this collection is incredible, and the attention to detail and all of the different variations, I mean, just it defies description. It really does. So I kind of wanted to see what that experience was like out of the gate. Like, how did you first take that first step into amassing a collection that is just really so vast?
Yeah. So after you get back into collecting as an adult, I think you realize you try, first of all, try to fulfill what you couldn't do as a kid. So you go after all the loose figures that you didn't have. Try to complete your loose run. Of course, there's always new things coming out. So there was a lot of modern stuff that I collected at the time. But when I really wanted to go back into vintage collecting, I really wanted to sort of focus on what were the characters that really made an impression on me growing up as a child, and what did I play with? And I always, went back to those three characters, and the two from Empire, obviously, Yoda and Boba Fett. And focus collecting is interesting. I've probably been focus collecting those three characters for about, I would say maybe about 10, 15 years. And it goes in stages. And focus collecting, you probably first start out with, what you can afford and, what's readily available. And so I think the first thing I look for are, well, I know Yoda had, a couple variations. There was an orange snake Yoda and a brown snake Yoda. So I started there. And same with Boba Fett. There's essentially two main Boba Fett variants. There's a kind of a brown belt, which is a Hong Kong Boba Fett, and a Taiwan Boba Fett, which has a darker belt. And then you start from there. And then you just learn from other collectors, from forums and groups, that all these other variants of these characters exist. And it's actually a neat little, almost like a scavenger hunt, to find these other variants of your favorite characters. And it's almost like a rabbit hole. The more you learn, the more you hunt, the more you find. And you see that there's not only just variations in the figure, but variations in the weapons, variations in which countries these were released, which factories made these figures. So it becomes almost like a detective type of scavenger hunt. You're looking for these rare and unusual variations, and it never ends. There's always something new that's discovered every day, and somebody finds out. And then moving from loose variants, you branch out. Obviously you could then go to carded pieces, mint on card pieces, and then there's all sorts of collectibles for every character. And the neat thing about focus collecting is that it allows you to almost carve out a slice of collecting that almost encompasses all different types of collectibles. It's impossible to collect everything nowadays. There's so much out there. But if you say you collect one focus collector, you can try to focus on all the variants that have been released from every country, or all the different card back variants, or all the different collectibles just for that figure. And it's much more doable, and much more not as much of a daunting task as if you were kind of going in after everything, every different character on every different card, or every different variation of every different figure. It also allows you to learn much more in depth about each character.
Narayan, I want to focus on that for a second. For the listeners out there that haven't had the pleasure of visiting the Mos Atlanta Cantina, Narayan, as John said, has walls. And let's maybe just core in on Boba Fett. You've probably got I couldn't even imagine 70 to 80 different loose variations of Boba Fett. If one was getting into variation collecting, what are some good resources they could use? Because the minutia of that area of collecting is just beyond me. I completed my loose run close to 20 years ago and just stopped. I probably have the wrong weapons with the wrong factory, with the wrong country of origin, but back then it wasn't a big thing. It's something that's really changed in the hobby. So you've obviously mastered it, at least for your character, your core character focus. What are some ways somebody that's interested in getting into that minutia of the hobby, what are some ways they can go about it? What are some resources they can use? Things like that.
I think one of the main resources that you can use, and certainly what I used initially, was other collectors, and especially other collectors' websites and reference websites. Imperial Gunnery is probably a fountain of information on these variations, not just for weapons, but also the different variants of these figures as they were made in different factories, which are really the basis for most of the variations that you see. And I think, back in Rebel Scum, or even currently now on Facebook, there are all kinds of focus groups, and there's a Boba Fett collectors group, and they all focus on every different little aspect of Boba Fett and all the different collectibles that go with it. But I found the Imperial Gunnery very, very useful initially. Another one, I believe it was called, I don't know if this was a website before, but it's called The Variant Villains. And I think there's a guy named Wolf, I believe he's in Germany, that runs this, but he basically does a very detailed analysis of all the different variations for certain figures. And one of the first figures I think he ever posted was Boba Fett. There is a Facebook group that he runs, and I think he's one of the preeminent loose variant collectors in the world. But then after that, it's almost learning by osmosis. The more you collect, the more you learn yourself, the more things you discover. Again, you learn so much just by interacting with other collectors that are collecting the same thing as you.
Well, it's definitely impressive, man. I mean, the hours and the knowledge that you've amassed, I can't imagine. But Senior collection, I've been thankful enough to go, come to your house and visit quite a few times with you. And honestly, I try to quiz you every time I'm there, and every little detail. You're never stumped. You remember it all, and it's quite amazing.
Absolutely. In fact, at one of the gatherings for the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors, Narayan, you were engaging in a conversation with somebody about variants, and I had no idea it went that broad and deep. All of the history regarding the variants and the different production houses and et cetera. And your amount of knowledge is incredibly impressive. And you were talking about some of the tools that you used and some of the resources you used to kind of gain that information and that knowledge to develop such an incredible, detailed collection. How hard was that, Narayan? Because you were talking about that was 10 years ago. And obviously, the amount of knowledge that is out there has to have grown within that time. And was this something that was challenging out of the gate? You were talking about doing detective work. How much detective work did you have to do? Was it tough?
Absolutely. I think, one of the few things that was around during that time may have been the Imperial Gunnery, but, other than, I think, some of the forums, it was hard to get all this information in one place. And you had to kind of search around for some of these things. And I would say in the last 5 years, variant collecting has really come into its own because the knowledge has been starting to get organized and collected in discrete areas where people can actually use it to, see what holes are still in their collections. And certainly Facebook, I think since Facebook has launched and all these different groups on every character seem to be popping up. There have been people that have been doing this research, long before I have really tried to organize this in a way that is useful to every collector. So yeah, it's been pretty difficult, but I think in the last few years it's become a lot easier to organize, how you collect in a focus.
Now, when you were falling down that rabbit hole, did it ever get so tough that you were like, hey, screw this. I'm just going to cut my losses and call it a day here. This amount of detail is just really too hard to research. Did you ever get to that point?
You know what? The more you go into this rabbit hole, it's impossible to come back out because it just is. It just gets more interesting, to be honest. The more you discover, because it's almost like a fun little thing that you do when you go to a show, and it's like you're having some knowledge that maybe is not available to anyone else that's just, looking out for certain action figures, and you'll see something that, somebody else doesn't see. You'll see that it's, something that's pretty hard to find or, rare because you have that knowledge behind you. And so I've always found the more I learned about this stuff that, you almost get more engaged in it. The more you go after things that you don't have or you haven't seen before. There was a newly discovered variant of Yoda's where he's called the platform shoes Yoda, and he essentially has this extra thick plastic under his feet. And sometimes it just involves one foot or both feet. And it was just something that people just discovered, just by looking at their figures. And it's not that common, but it's kind of a fun detail to go back and discover a detail that you hadn't seen before. But yeah, so it's certainly a new variation that's been discovered certainly has been there. Right.
And I have to say something about just the way Narayan's always looking at variants, as far as, when it comes to Boba Fett or Luke, the three that he knows, because he's even come to my house and he picks up my Yoda and I'm just like, okay, it's just a normal Yoda. And then he's like, well, you've got the cherry-eyed version. Hold on, let me look at the cape. And yep, it's got the right jacket, right. Yeah, and that's the type of person Narayan is. He's just so willing to share his knowledge of the characters. And, if I've got a question on a baggie, or if I've got a question, hey, is this Boba Fett legit? He's always there to help. And that's what I love about Narayan. He's always willing to share his knowledge. And it just, he's one of the good guys in the collecting world.
Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.
And one thing that Justin mentioned off the air, getting back to the variants and collecting these specific characters, of course, Boba Fett and Yoda tied to The Empire Strikes Back. We're celebrating that 40th. But Justin was talking about off the air something that he refers to as the Boba Fett tax. Justin, would you like to explain?
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
Yeah, so fortunately for me in my bank account, I don't focus on Boba Fett. I'm not too far off with Han and Leia as original characters, but it's always curious to me. It can be anything from a Power of the Force 2 orange carded figure all the way up to a revenge proof card. There always seems to be just that bit of hike on every Boba Fett item that comes out. Narayan, any interesting stories that you've experienced going, down that rabbit hole of Boba Fett focus collecting? Any outlandish prices you've seen just because it has that infamous character?
I think anyone that collects Boba Fett has certainly experienced this, and I think it's not even supply and demand; it's just demand. And it's just a character that just so many people like and so many people find interesting. He somehow holds this almost like grail-like, persona among Star Wars collectibles that, anything that has Boba Fett will sell. It's like Tom Cruise in the box office. It's like you put Boba Fett on it and it'll sell more than anything else. And it's obviously that the character has made an impression on so many people. And, that's translated to, the collectibles. Certainly it hasn't made as big of an impact on, I think, the further down you are in focus collecting in terms of like, if you're collecting loose figures, it's actually a pretty common figure, but it still seems to, the asking prices still seem to be about 2 to 3 times what, any other action figure would be. And even the carded figures are actually not, terribly hard. They're scarce. It's just that when people collect them, they tend to keep them. They don't sell them because it's almost like a badge of honor in your collection to have a Boba Fett. And people are very reluctant to part with them. And so they seem to ask more and more prices for them. And that certainly hasn't gotten any better in recent years.
Yeah, for any of our listeners out there, if you're thinking of doing a focus collection and potentially choosing Boba Fett, I suggest you play the lottery and hope for the best, because I know it can definitely get pricey. They're not hard to find, but the asking prices, as Narayan said, they're up there for sure. Even Return of the Jedi carded Boba Fetts are, just crazy compared to the other characters in that run. It's just quite amazing. I think the Return of the Jedi stuff has gone up exponentially over the past few years, honestly.
Yeah, as I think most Return of the Jedi characters probably are in the 100 to 500 range max, and most Boba Fett's almost start at that price point. And they keep working themselves up and up. It is what it is. If you enter this field of focus collecting and you choose Boba Fett, you know what you're getting into.
Yeah. It's not a fun thing to collect. I love Boba Fett, and it pains me being a Boba Fett focus collector. Cause we were at a show in September and I'm trying to get a carded figure. And I was like, he was wanting double or triple what everybody else was wanting. And I've even seen on Nixon used to make Star Wars watches, and they'd have 2 of them. One was an R2-D2 watch. One was a Boba Fett watch. And the Boba Fett watch was $75 more than the identical R2-D2 just because it had a Boba Fett paint scheme on it. So everybody takes advantage of the Boba Fett tax. And it is a real thing. And it really sucks. It's the pain of collecting a popular figure.
And before we go, Narayan, I want to give listeners the best ideas possible of how detailed and vast your collection is. Now, Justin mentioned earlier you have somewhere along the lines of maybe 80 different variants of Boba Fett. Is that correct? And also, what about Yoda?
Yeah, so with Boba Fett, I'm not sure there's 80 different variants, but probably, a good number. And a lot of these are, some subtle variations. So there may be some differences in the paint. For example, there's a black belt. And as I mentioned before, Taiwan Boba Fett's tend to have a darker or black belt, and Hong Kong tend to have a brown belt. Well, there's a variation where those things are switched. So there's some Taiwan Fetts that actually have a more brown belt, And there's some Hong Kong Fetts that actually have a black belt. So it's, and then there's, variations in the limbs. Sometimes the limbs tend to be pale. There's foreign variants. Lily Letty is a very well-known variant in which the color looks much different. And then another variant, a very well-known variant, is the Tri-Logo Boba Fett. And it has almost pale limbs and looks, very distinctive as compared to the ones that would be available here by Kenner. I'm sure there's some Boba Fetts I'm still looking for, but I'm pretty satisfied with how many variants I have. Certainly have most of the major factory variants and most of the foreign variants that have been made for him. I mean, if you just focus on the Tri-Logo Fett, there's actually little different variations where he has a painted, knee armor and a painted dart on his wrist, and there's all sorts of 6 different combinations of those things. So it's pretty crazy that you could look for a very small thing and then that's a variant, but that is what it is.
This is the way.
And then when we get to a character like Yoda, actually it becomes even more complex because when you have with Boba Fett, he essentially has one accessory, one weapon, and not a lot of different variations on that blaster for Boba Fett. But when you have Yoda, he actually has a cloak, a cane, and a snake, and then the figure itself. So you actually have so many different parts to that figure, and all of those things actually can have variations. Luckily, most of the factories are very consistent with which weapons or which accessories went with their figure. If you're trying to, put together figures piecemeal, it's very common things get mismatched. For example, a brown snake Yoda, it goes with a specific figure. It looks different than the Yoda that went with the orange snake. So it's not just a matter of just putting any accessory with the variant. It has to be the right one. And I know Justin always jokes that when I ever come over to his collection, I always notice that his orange snake and brown snake Yodas are mismatched. They actually have the opposite accessories on them as what they should. So.
I still won't change that just to jab you every time you come over. Tell me every time too.
But yeah, it's a fun thing to look for.
And also, before we go, I think it would be a disservice if we didn't mention the Boba Fett firing jetpack, right? For as far as the loose Boba Fett goes, that's an infamous part of Star Wars action figure collecting history. Narayan, do you own a jetpack firing Boba Fett prototype?
I do not own a original prototype of the Rocket Fett, which really is a holy grail for most collectors. And I mean, the prices of those things have been exponentially going up. I think, what are they, over 80,000 now? For one of those things.
I think the last one sold around 185 after buyer's premium.
Yeah, and it's not even if you're really talking about prototypes, which is kind of the next phase in focus collecting after you collect production pieces, which I haven't fully gotten really into that yet. Even the rocket firing Fett is actually not amongst the rarest of prototypes. Probably maybe about 750 to 60 pieces of that particular prototype out there. And there's certainly other prototypes. There's only maybe a handful of prototypes, but it's also a matter of, as we talked about, demand. If there's a lot of people looking for a prototype, and it's also possible that there's enough prototypes out there, that you could potentially get it, that actually increases the demand for it. If there's only one or two of them and they're locked away in somebody's collection, it's almost impossible, and nobody really tries to get those prototypes. But since there's a fair number of rocket sets out there, there's people going after them. And that's what pushes the prices up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, highly, highly sought after piece, not only for Star Wars collectors. I mean, it's basically the Mona Lisa of toy collecting, right? I mean, everybody knows about that piece, the history behind it with the Battlestar incident, and then having to change it from, rocket firing to removing the mechanism. I've been fortunate enough to see a handful of them in my time. I've had the opportunity to buy a couple, and now I'm kicking myself because I could have bought it and sold it and paid off my house. Just again, the mystique, right? That figure, as well as Boba Fett, holds just this mystique. People are just drawn to that rocket firing Fett, And obviously for good reason.
Yeah, my wife actually loves giving me crap because we were at a mutual collector's collection, and he happens to have a Rocket Fett, and everybody's, she's sort of in one corner of the room, and I'm like, hey babe, come here. There's a Rocket Fett. We, like Justin said, and I'm like, come look at this. And she goes, oh, fights her way to the front of the crowd, and the guy just drops it in her hand and goes, here you go. And everybody just stops. And are like, holy crap, you just handed her a Rocket Fett, because everybody wants to touch it. And she's just looking at it like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool, but it's just a figure. And then, of course, she goes, where's the rocket? And he goes, it's over here, but you're not seeing that. Because she's like, let's see it work. And, it was just a cool moment. And she still busts my balls about that. She goes, you remember that time I got to held that Rocket Fett? And it's a cool piece. But yeah, they're definitely.
Yeah, it certainly would have been a very unique action figure had it been released, and certainly now there are replica versions of that figure that you can obtain. Even Hasbro has released one. It would have had a very cool play feature that I think a lot of kids would have had fun with, and unfortunately there was some danger involved with it, and then we never got to see the light of day. But then that just added to the mystique of that character even more. There it is, the Rocket Fett.
Well, Narayan, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about your vast collection of Boba Fett and Yoda figures on the card from the original Kenner run. We really appreciate it. Celebrating the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back. And big thanks to Justin Haney and Glenn Williams for riding shotgun. It's great to be a part of this team, and I really appreciate your knowledge. And remember to visit the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors on Facebook. You can also find Smuggler's Galaxy on Facebook and Instagram. So, guys, any last words before we go?
Yeah, I just, we couldn't have celebrated the 40th of Empire any better than having Narayan on and his amazing Focus collections. Narayan, I just want to say thanks for joining us today and helping everything you do with the club, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Narayan. You're one of the good guys.
Absolutely.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. It's great to be in this club. And again, thanks for the invitation.
All right, Smugglers Galaxy listeners, we will see you next time.